He was a competitor. He was someone who was able to put pressure on every little part of your life. And I, like a fool, rose to the bait. I was getting so much grief for being beaten by him. The rivalry gave me an opportunity. If it wasn't for Michael, I would never have found out to what height I could go as a racing driver. A plane has reportedly gone down an Arkley golf course. Before we knew it, the bloody police were in that front door, and my mum was being restrained, and it was horrendous. Our world was literally shattered like a vase, in all directions. You suddenly realise, well, wait a minute, someone's died, and all that anybody really cares about is whether they're going to get paid.
Welcome to Fora Jellicoe, here in London's vibrant King's Cross, proud partners of High Performance. This brand new workspace is designed to elevate your everyday, with 12 floors built to empower you to work in your own unique way. Let's have a quick tour. There's an on-site cafe to fuel your day. They've got this gorgeous basement gym for early morning workout sessions, a rooftop terrace with beautiful views across the city. You'll also enjoy the quiet calm of the wellness room. We love it. Thank you, Fora. Right, let's get on with the episode. Well, Damon, welcome to High Performance.
Well, thanks for having me. Yeah.
Let me take you back to a moment that I'm sure you've relived in your mind and in many other ways over the years. Japan, 1996.
Oh, I thought you were going to say 94. But anyway, 96, okay.
We're going to do 96. Yeah. You cross the finish line.
Yeah.
You become the world champion. What's the first thing you think about?
I think, well, I had some time to think about it because it happened on about lap 20, I think, when Jacques Villeneuve was out of the race and he was the only title rival. So I'm now in the car going round and round and round, knowing I'm world champion, whatever happens. So I actually came on the radio to the team and said, they came on and said, "Congratulations, you're world champion." I said, "So can I come in now?" They said, "We prefer it if you keep going." So I actually did. I'm glad I did because I won that race as well. So, and I had plenty of time to think of what to say before I got out the car. But you can't express yourself. There's no way of putting it into words. The first thing people say is Murray comes up to you and goes, Murray Walker, and goes, "So how's it feel?" You don't know. You're still in race mode. You're still in the car, in the cockpit, and but I can tell you, it's a huge relief. That's the first emotion, is really just relief, because I hadn't slept. I just want to get the job done. It's been weeks waiting to find out, and you just go, "Oh, I've done it. I can do something else now if I want to."
Yeah. And you said you had plenty of time to think. How prominent was your father in your thoughts on that lap?
I think there was an element of that. I think, but then there had been throughout my career, I kind of wanted to acknowledge his input. That he'd had. So he died when I was 15, but his name was huge in the sport and in the world of sport, and also in the world of British society. He was a famous person. So I was very proud of my dad, and I never got to find out whether he would have been approving of me becoming a racing driver. I think he did say when I was younger that he was asked by an interviewer, "Would you like your son to be a racing driver?" And he said, "Well, I think he's too intelligent to become a racing driver." But he was clearly wrong. But in those days it was very dangerous. So he didn't really want his son. I can understand if he didn't want me to be a racing driver. But yeah, definitely very proud. A little moment of reflection on that, the meaning of that. That sad that he wasn't there to see it happen. My mum was around, but I think we all felt very much that he was present in some way.
So for people that don't know the background to this and what happened with your dad, are you happy to share the story of that fateful night when you lost your dad?
Yeah. It still has a kind of powerful effect on me. I mean, it's not something that was my most enjoyable experience, but the way it happened was, I'll just take a sip, hang on a second. The way it happened was that I was watching television, and we lived, so I would have been 14, and I was watching television with my younger sister, Samantha. And my mother was in the kitchen having dinner with two of our neighbours and expecting her husband home later that evening. And they'd been testing in the south of France. They'd been testing their new car with a new driver. My dad had a plane, and he was the pilot, and they'd five other people who were the key personnel in the team, including the new young driver, Tony Bryce. And they were directed to come back by Heathrow Control a certain way. And anyway, I was in the TV room watching TV, and they go, "We have a news flash. A plane has reportedly gone down an Arkley golf course." And I'm thinking, well, that's just up the road. And I knew my dad was flying back. Small plane, blah. So penny drops, and I'm not sure, but it doesn't sound good. And so I went from that. I said, I didn't alarm my sister, and I just crept out of the room and went. And before I got to the kitchen where my mum was, the phone had gone. And a journalist had obviously got through. And so I could hear my mum on the other. "What do you mean? Who are you? Why are you asking these questions? What is that?" And I thought, oh my God, something in it. It's what my worst fear. So she puts the phone down, and I come in white as a sheet and say to my mum, "I've just seen a news flash." And then from that moment on, it was pandemonium. And our world was literally, shattered like a vase, in all directions. It was a very traumatic experience. My mum became very hysterical, and it was just nightmare. But,
And when did you get the confirmation that it was your dad's plane?
well, more phone calls, I guess, started to come through. And before we knew it, the bloody police were in that front door, and my mum was being restrained, and it was horrendous. And then more people arrive, and before we know it, the house is full of friends, people who want to support. But it was just pandemonium because he was famous, So and TV, news, doctors, God knows what.
And what did you do?
I think I remember just sitting in the living room full of people, just being cuddled by whoever there was, and with Samantha. And then they had to find my other sister, Bridget, who had been to a party. So she gets in a party, she gets a knock on the door with a policeman at the door. So it was a pretty nasty shock for everyone, especially as he'd just retired from having been a racing driver that summer. So at the British Grand Prix, he'd announced his retirement from racing after 17 years in Formula One, and we thought was home and dry.
Yeah.
So it was only like 4 months later, July, August, September, October, November, 5 months later, and it was all over, including the race team, including all the people on the plane. So no future, it really was a catastrophe.
I think that's the other thing that it's important to explain to people so they can really understand the gravity of not just losing your father, who's a well-known figure, not just losing your father who was a hero, not just to you, but to millions of other people because of his career. But you also lost everything that your father stood for because of the circumstances surrounding the plane crash meant that his entire estate really was.
Yeah, I mean, material things, not what he stood for as a person. That was clearly well established. But of course, there was accusations that it was his fault as well. So in my book, years later, I got given a book. You remember a guy called Konrad Bartelski, who's still Britain's highest placed downhill skier, Val Gardini in 1982, I think. Anyway, but his dad was a Polish pilot in the Second World War, and he was an experienced pilot, and he'd written a book about unexplained accidents. So this guy, Conrad, said, my dad's written a book about plane crashes, and he's written a chapter on your dad's one. So I went through it all. And in his view, my dad was justified in attempting to land at Elstree. So Elstree we lived in Boreham Wood, which is just, you can see the planes my school was at the end of the runway of Elstree Aerodrome. So I used to see my dad's plane coming in when I was in classes. And sometimes if it was near the end of the day, I'd nip round and see and get a lift home with him. And so we used to go everywhere in that plane. We went on holidays. So I'd flown around with him. But I was asked to go and do the investigation. So the Civil Aviation Authority have to do an investigation. And so I was one of the witnesses, having flown a lot with my dad, and they'd ask me questions about how he flew and so forth. But in this book, Conrad's dad asked the question, why did Heathrow ask him to direct himself towards Elstree before he was lined up with the runway? And it was a foggy night and so forth. Anyway, the question is, it didn't matter. At the time, I remember seeing a headline, because the next day the papers arrive and they're in the kitchen. You go down, it's this crazy thing where you need to see it in print, don't you? And then when you see it in print, it's not. Some of the headlines were, he pushed his luck one too many times, and stuff like that. So you now, not only you're grieving, but you're also realizing that some people are trying to find a way of blaming as well. And so it was a pretty traumatic period in our life. Yeah.
And it meant that the race team was lost, but also your house was lost, your income source was lost.
Well, yeah, clearly the guy he was quite extended on this race team. And then the dollar and the pound went weird, and there was a question over his qualifications. And he had got a thing called a instrument rating, which meant you can fly in cloud and so forth and at night. But I think it had lapsed and it just hadn't been renewed by his lawyer, I think. But so that meant that the estate was exposed to claims, and plus the team had to fold because it hadn't. So drivers who might have been driving were out of pocket, and so there was a bit of a financial hole. And my mum couldn't cope. I was too young, but it taught me a lesson anyway. So, when you're that young, you suddenly realize, well, wait a minute, someone's died, and all that anybody really cares about is whether they're going to get paid, and you kind of go, okay, this is not the fairy tale that you kind of imagine, where people are sympathetic. And so that was a kind of experience that sticks with you.
And how did you balance the private grief for your dad with the sort of public narrative of having to share this grief?
Well, you didn't want to share the grief. I didn't want to share the grief. I mean, I didn't want anybody else. The funeral was a very public affair, and so I think I felt it. What it did for me, I think, is it made me very bitter. Is probably the wrong word, but I think very circumspect about society. I regarded it with suspicion, and I didn't feel comfortable about anything that was trying to invite you in to join up with society at all. I just felt like there's something sinister here I don't like, and I would avoid it as much as I could. So
that term sinister is quite loaded, isn't it?
Well, it is sinister. It's because I was right. I think that it's fair to say that as you grow up and you become less naive, you realize there is such a thing as a sinister side to our societies, human societies. We are dangerous creatures, and we are vindictive, and we are all the good things, but also there is the ruthless side to humanity.
So did you get any help or support in being able to go through grief?
No. So I do remember certain people and certain individuals who did things at the time, and it stuck with me for a long time. Like, for instance, there was a chaplain who was at our school, and he made the effort to come see me, and he came into my bedroom, which don't get any, I'm not suggesting anything was wrong. He was there for me, but I had that was my private space, that was, everything else was, the house is full of other people, but he was there to see how I was. And I remember that distinctly, being a very important offering, let's say. So that if you're talking about human nature and the good side to human nature, and having a glimmer of hope or faith in human nature, then that was an important example. And of course, my own school friends and people who are close to me. But you close in, you don't trust, you lose trust in other people. Yeah. But years later, I made the effort to go and talk to someone, and after I stopped racing, and I wanted to get some answers about what I'd actually done with my life. Why did I put myself through this trial? And also, what do you do when you don't have that anymore in your life? And so I was a bit lost when I stopped racing. But that had been happening whilst I was racing as well. So, and so we're talking about therapy. And when I went and saw the guy, he said it will take about 3 years. Anyway, I went 15 years.
Right.
I just kept going because I just found it so interesting. And so I used to go nearly every week and see someone and talk about life and me and the world, my relationship with it. And so it was very important. And I learned, unfortunately, the guy I used to see died after 15 years, which is, interestingly, and sadly, also the same amount of years I'd had with my dad. But so don't come near me for too long, because But
what was said in those sessions that helped you?
I think things to do with the way the world is, and so if I understand the purpose of this is to discuss things that people have experienced and have gone through that can be of use to people watching. So I think that there is a disconnect between what we are led to believe and what is real, and what is deep down how people are by necessity. So that is part of therapy. So therapy is basically finding out who you are and chucking away the bits you don't want, and also not carrying baggage, and being effective in being able to navigate life. And so being able to identify what is a good path and what is not a good path as well.
What would you say to people watching this who are fearful of going to therapy?
Well, the first question is, why are you fearful of going to therapy? Is a question in itself. I think people understandably want to conceal themselves from somebody else. It takes an awful, huge amount of trust to sit in a room with someone else and reveal yourself entirely to that person, and that's understandable. But if you don't ever find someone you can talk to and trust, if you don't take that leap of faith, then you will never be able to have these conversations. And if you're stuck and you're going around in circles and you can't get out of I literally concluded I'd give up. I got to the point where I was going, okay, I've read every book, I've listened to every poet, I've read everything. I can't. There's some things I just can't work out. I need someone else to help me, and it's a personal thing. So it's not about them telling you what happens. It's about them facilitating you discovering for yourself what is true. And it's like knocking down little walls, and eventually you're getting more space to live in. And sometimes you're on the other side of a wall and you're kind of outside rather than being locked in.
And do you wish that you'd done this earlier in your life? Because there's a very moving moment in the new film about your life where your wife Georgie says, I was at a party and I met Damon and he was the saddest and most lost person I'd ever seen in my life.
Yeah, I thought I was okay.
What did you feel when you heard her say that?
Yeah, that's an interesting part of this film because I mean Georgie has known me since I was 21. We've been very close, and we're still learning about each other, and so she still says things that surprise me, and amuse me and interest me. So,
did you feel lost? And
I didn't. I think I did feel. I felt like I was outside whatever was going on, and I was sort of. But then you could say that might have been a product of having a famous dad. So, for example, I can remember going to school when we were kind of dropped off at the primary school and left with all these children I'd never met before, and then we were the children of the famous racing driver, and so you kind of go, okay, well, and the interaction from either the teachers or the not so much the other pupils was curiosity because your dad's doing something famous. So you're kind of my from that moment onwards, I think I was quite standoffish, because I didn't like people coming into, wait, you're after me because of my dad, sort of thing, So that resistance maybe was brought on early on by that realization that there is some sort of fascination with something my dad was doing, and then you're kind of like you can't melt into the background. You can't be like everybody else because everyone knows who you are. So you lose that freedom to be you because it's recorded, and it's not recorded in the sense that films recorded. It is people, at that school you will always be the son of. So I think that might have had a negative effect. You wanted to be ignored. You wanted to just have a normal.
But Damon, you then chose to become a Formula 1 racing driver.
Well, eventually, yeah.
Where you couldn't be more compared against your dad because that was what he did.
So
that's the most fascinating thing here for me is that the one thing you wanted to do was avoid the comparison with your dad or to avoid being Graham Hill Mark II, yet chose to follow the route into Formula 1 when, as you've gone on record as saying, it kind of was an unnatural fit for you. You never even wanted to.
You could interpret that as being finally so fed up with being expected to do it that I thought, I'll do it. Okay, I'll do it. Let's see what happens.
Do you think it was maybe that? Do you think maybe that was it?
I think it was. No, I don't think so. I think it was more me wanting. I wanted to succeed in something, and the bike racing was good. I was starting to win, but it didn't have the career path that say F1 did. And I just started to think, right, this is what I like doing. I like racing and I like going fast. And so there was an attraction to that, the racing, that fulfilled me. And in some ways I finally overcame the hurdle of that problem, whereby it was, I would be denying myself because I wanted to frustrate the people who expected me to do it.
Yeah.
I mean, talk about complicated, but you
how
understand what I'm saying.
That?
Huh?
How did you overcome that hurdle then?
I think I just got in a car and, like you said, the school thing. When I went there, I sort of when someone said it was quite good, I was quite surprised, and I just thought, oh, okay, how good, let's find out. And that was the next challenge, I think. I was often pursuing this car racing plan.
If your dad hadn't been lost in tragic circumstances when you were just a teenager, Do you think you would have been in the car that day racing in Formula One?
Well, I don't know. I mean, it was a question I was asked in the making of this film that we've made about that whole dynamic between having been the son of a famous person, famous racing driver, and then wanting to become a racing driver myself, whether the motivation was driven to a degree by some sort of desire to fulfill something that belonged to him in a way. I don't know. It's not. All I can say is I had competitive drive, a bit like he did, and also my mum, because she rode for England. So the both my parents were quite competitive, and but I think I resisted when I was growing up the obvious, which was, are you going to be a racing driver like your dad? Which is what, people would meet, they go, oh, hello, Damon, little Damon, are you going to be a racing driver like your dad? And I must have taken a dislike to these people because I had decided from a very early age I wasn't going to satisfy them. But, life takes you in different directions. And the thing I loved was motorcycle racing. But so it was a kind of motorsport, but it was just my motorsport. It wasn't my dad's. It was my individual choice. Right. So in some ways, I did manage to express my own particular, favoritism or appreciation or whatever it's called, of the kind of sport I wanted to do. But then I got an opportunity to have a go in car racing. My mum had spoken to someone, or they'd spoken to her, saying, because I used to ride a bike to school when I was younger, and then I worked as a dispatch rider, and then I raced bikes on the weekend. And I think someone must have said to my mum, he's going to kill himself. You need to get him off those bikes. So, and one of the solutions was to have a go in a racing school in France called the Winfield Elf School, which was the proving ground, the opportunity for all French racing drivers. But it was an English school. But clearly the links to the Renault companies and the French companies meant that Alain Prost, Jacques Lafitte, Patrick Tambay, all the great names of French racing had gone through this school and they had been sponsored. So it was a way of proving your spurs and getting a leg up. So a bit like the Red Bull team now, if you get selected as a Red Bull driver, they'll support you. So that was a great opportunity because, I went to the school not thinking I was interested at all. In fact, I went with a bunch of young lads, and they were talking about Jonathan Palmer, and I'm going, who? I had no idea who Jonathan Palmer was. Sorry, Jonathan. But, I didn't know anything about motor racing. They're all reading Autosport, and I don't know what was going on. I just, there's a car, I'll have a go. Anyway, evidently I did quite well. And so that kind of lit a little thing in my head, which I suddenly thought, if I could do well at this, how well do these Formula One drivers get on, And then I started to look at car racing a bit more seriously. But it was really I just avoided doing the obvious. It seemed to me that's what I was trying to.
So what age were you when you went to this place in France?
I would have been late, 24, 23. No, 23, something like that, I think, yeah.
Which is late.
Very late. I mean, just, the first time I raced a car was 23, 22. And I'd never done karting, which is what, all the Johnny Herberts and the people have been doing. You have to do really nowadays to get the foundation. So I didn't have that foundation.
What was it about racing that appealed to you?
As I said, the sheer love of controlling a vehicle, going fast around a racetrack, and also comparing yourself. So you get a very easy answer with motor racing or any competitive endeavor. You get a result. So in most things in life, it's very difficult to know who's won or who's had. So in the entertainment business, you get BAFTAs and you kind of, there's the winner, right? we found it. We need to know how to measure ourselves as well in society. I think there is a kind of want to know. So It's very simple. There's a simple kind of process. You think of the race, you enter the race, you go to the race, you prepare for the race, and you do the best you can in the race. And at the end, you got the result. Well, how did that go? Goal-orientated kind of motivation is quite easy to calculate.
Your story is actually remarkable in that you were in your late 20s. Nobody gets into Formula One in their late 20s unless they've been racing karts and cars and Formula 2.
I was 30. I was 32.
Is that how old you are for your debut?
Yeah. The first race, 32.
I mean, that's like most people are retiring and winding up their racing
How do you
career.
like this? How old was my dad when he first did his first race?
32? No way.
Yeah. So we're late developers, the Hills. But
that's very strange.
Yeah, it's weird. I mean, of course, you have to factor in that there was a huge interruption in my development, let's say, with my dad dying and then going off and doing bike racing. So I didn't follow a normal path. But once I got that direction, so if you take it from the time I first did my first car race in 93, so it was 9 years to get to Formula One, which is, I suppose, okay. But 9 years is still a long time, not in Formula One. It's not my best years, probably. But
so for just very briefly for the audience to know, you raced bikes, you did okay, you eventually stopped, ran out of money, you were a new dad, you were newly married, you were in your 20s, you needed a job. You'd done a little bit of single-seater driving and you'd shown you're okay, and then an opportunity came up at Williams as a test driver.
Yeah.
But let's just be really clear. Test drivers don't become racing drivers, right? A team has their drivers.
Yeah.
And then something quite remarkable happens right before the start of the season, doesn't it?
Mm.
This episode of High Performance is brought to you in partnership with Fora. They're our official workspace partner, and they're reimagining what it truly means to work well. I'm actually here in their new Jellicoe workspace. This is right in the heart of King's Cross in London, and it's such an impressive space. It's not just another office. I think this place sets the benchmark for what a modern workspace should be. It is packed with everything that you need to operate at your best. They've got an on-site cafe, a fully equipped gym. They've got a gorgeous roof terrace up on the 12th floor, calming wellness rooms. The interiors are incredible. It's not just a place to work. This is a place to really perform. And you know, we love Fora so much that we record every episode of High Performance in our studio in a Fora building. And they offer a growing collection of over 70 beautifully designed workspaces across London, the UK and Germany. So if you're a solo founder, if you're scaling a team, if you're an established business, honestly, there is a space for you to thrive. Just visit foraspace.com, that's foraspace.com, to explore their locations and discover what it really means to work well.
If you're a test driver, you're basically a washed up, no-hoper for the future person. In those days, so it was a good job if your career had kind of not, peaked in those days. But then, because they were developing the active car in those days, which was a highly technical car that was going to be used the following year, and I was the Williams test driver, and all expectation was that Nigel Mansell would be racing it with Alan Prost. When he found out Alan Prost was going to be the driver, late in the day, he said to Frank, "I'm not going to be racing next year. You've got Alan Prost, but you haven't." And everyone else was signed up. So the only person who knew enough about this car was little old me, who'd been driving it all year, developing it. And everyone else had pretty much signed up. I think Riccardo Patrese tried to come back. He'd signed for Benetton. Right. And there was a bit of a competition to get in that seat. I think Martin Brundle was the other person who might have been in contention.
So did you have to still do a test to get the race seat?
Yeah, I had to. I was testing anyway, but then they tried to appraise me to see if I would cope with pressure, I suppose. And so I was given a kind of a very important test to Estoril that that Frank would be coming down and we'd be speaking to Alain, and so that's in the film. There's some great little snippets.
Isn't there a moment where, for this test that is, let's be honest, now that we can join the dots going backwards, this was the test that defined your future as a racing driver?
Yeah.
Was it on the anniversary of your dad's death?
Yeah. Well, the flight out was. So the deal was I was at a friend's house. Sunday, I'm in Fulham to get to Heathrow, piece of cake. I've got loads of time anyway to catch this flight, to go to Portugal, to test the next day, to find out whether I'm going to get a drive in Formula One in the best car alongside Alan Prost. So I thought I'd left enough time. Anyway, Chelsea had been playing at home or something like that. Anyway, I get into Chelsea and there's people everywhere. I can't move. My flight is about to go. I'm literally now in a car raging because I'm going to miss the flight. Imagine, sorry, Frank, I missed the flight. My God, no. And I somehow I literally was racing towards Heathrow, sorry. But I finally got out of the traffic. But if anyone was coming out of a Chelsea match and saw a bloke in a car in Fulham banging the steering wheel and the car rocking and hearing him screaming, that was me. But I managed to and I was literally going to leave it on the ramp. I was going to go, I'm jumping out this car, leaving the car. I don't care if they blow it up or whatever. I'm gashing that plane. I got on the plane. I sat on the plane. I was sweat pouring off me, stress levels. And in those days, we had Filofaxes. We didn't have them. So I looked at my Filofax and it said 29th of November, which is the date of my dad dying. And I just thought, and now I'm on a plane, on the same day. Oh, God. And I just thought, sod it, nothing else can happen, really. And so I got to Estoril, bit of a late night, and drove the next day, and they went off and made the decision. And that was, but then there are loads of occasions like that in your career, but where things could have gone a different way.
Yeah.
Those are the ones where the door opened and you went through. The rest of the time, you're just pushing on the door and hoping it opens.
And what was the test to see if you could cope with pressure?
I think it was that. I think it wasn't designed like that, but I think it was Frank and Patrick Head who ran the teams at Williams, seeing whether, if given someone an opportunity of a lifetime, whether they could actually just do the job without screwing up, But I mean, there's a huge difference between testing and going to racing in Formula One. And so I did fall over myself a little bit in the first race because I spun off on the first lap, but gradually redeemed myself during the year and won 3 races and measured up okay to Alain.
So would you explain to the layman, in this case me, what is the difference then between testing and racing?
Nobody cares about testing. Racing is the thing that counts. It's the thing that everyone watches. It's the moment where every driver is going up a notch. You don't know what's happening in testing. A lot of drivers keep their powder dry. There's no point in really showing what you've got until it comes to the last few minutes of qualifying and in the race.
So how do you prepare differently then?
It's just focus. I think it's mental preparation. So rehearsing ahead of time what you're going to be doing, what you're there to do, what needs to be done, and having a kind of sequence of events in your head. You go, right, I need to get this done, then I can do that, and then so you've got a map you can follow for the weekend. And if anything tries to derail that, you have to kind of go, okay, well, how much am I prepared to 5 minutes over here is okay for do an interview or something, but then I need to get back to that. So time management in your head and really focusing and dispensing with the trivia, dispensing with the distractions, the things that are totally irrelevant to your performance. And so that's why you see the change in the personality when they go to a race meeting when drivers, and I think the drivers today are just amazing how they can cope with the amount of attention and distractions they have in the media, mostly, the things they have to do, and then get stuck into the job itself. It wasn't as bad when I was racing, that's for sure.
I remember watching that first race at Brands. I was 15 at the time, and I, like a lot of the nation, I was excited, like, Graham Hill's boy is going to be a Formula One driver. And I remember not just seeing you spin off and have a couple of moments, but I remember the first thing that they do as they do that on the television is a cut to Frank Williams and Patrick Head.
Yeah, that's right.
Not looking very happy.
Yeah.
How was it in that first year with a boss like Frank, who, regardless of whether you're a rookie driver or not, takes no prisoners?
Well, I mean, you're very conscious that these guys have got your career in their hands, and they can quite easily just screw it up and go off you go. But they gave me, in that first race, actually, Frank did give me a little bit of a soft landing and a kind of, he expected, I think he was prepared for a few blips. But by the end of the season, he was rooting for me because I was the English driver and he had a French driver with a Renault engine. I think he secretly would like to have had a British driver doing well.
And you shared a team with Alain Prost in your first season in F1.
Yeah.
What did you learn from observing the professor behind the wheel?
Well, he doesn't give anything away.
Is that right?
No, he's perfectly charming.
Even for a rookie like you, where he could give you a real leg up.
No, I would tell this story. It's great. So you talk about setting the car up and you're going around and go, what's the car doing? And I go, hey, on turn 3, my car does this, it does kind of little jink in it. And what about yours, Alain? And he says, mine does the same. That's it. In other words, that's your problem, kid.
Never tells you anything.
No.
So he wouldn't share setup?
And we talk about it a little bit.
Yeah.
But he poker player, cards right up against his chest. You're not going to see his cards. And you respect that. He's a competitor.
What did you learn though from watching him at work?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I've been with Nigel Mansell, Alain Prost, and Ayrton Senna a little bit, not a lot, and other drivers as well. They're all different. And they're all different persons, people, different personalities, different. They go about their work differently. You can't say this is the ingredient. The only thing you can say is that they're single-minded, and you're working with a team, but you're also protecting your own career within that team. So it's awkward, an awkward situation. If you imagine being in the team, which we may well have this year with McLaren, you're in the same team with the guy who's your rival for the championship. So you're actually not able to get the whole team, if you like, directed towards you, as you might find with, say, Michael Schumacher's team, or Max's team, where they're going to be all focused on one driver. You're aware that the information that you impart is also potentially benefiting your rival. So it gets quite complicated.
Was it made clear to you in that first season that you're very much the number 2 driver or not?
Yeah, I think it was. Yeah, with Alain, it was definitely. Here's a guy who won 3 world championships and you haven't won a race yet. So, and you're lucky to be there. So, good luck. We'll help you do as well as you can because it helps us in the constructors' championship. But we don't expect you to. Maybe secretly they would like me to have beaten Alain, but Alain was definitely there to win for the whole project, which was French world champion with a Renault engine, blah, blah, blah.
And did you have a moment where you mentally transitioned from feeling lucky to be there to actually feeling you deserve to be there?
I think that was a difficult transition. So, yeah, because they didn't pick me out of a bunch of drivers and go, this guy's really talented. I had to prove that I had the ability. And I constantly, I think I was marginal, in providing confidence to them. I mean, I always felt strongly that I could do it, but I also felt like that I still needed a bit to prove. And I was one of those drivers. So constantly striving to prove that I've got the credentials. And of course, if you do that, you're never given the benefit of that doubt. You have to be utterly the confidence. So this is what we were talking about before about naivety. I think if I'd known then what I know now, then I think I would have approached it slightly differently. And I did, and I eventually did, but not till after I'd had some rough experiences, I'd say.
So what did you do differently eventually?
Well, I think I took some advice as well. So I organised myself in my head a little bit better and went to approach things like differently in my job during 96. So I very much was not, I got rid of the distractions and the worries about what other people were doing that you can't do anything about. That's a big thing, is worrying about things you have no control over. So only focus on what you have some control over. And what I had control over was how I performed.
So 93 ended up being a good season for you. You picked up some wins, proved a few people wrong, kept the seat for 94. When did you find out that Ayrton Senna was going to be your teammate that season?
Oh, God. Well, Alain was... He was definitely retiring anyway. He announced he was going. So I don't know when it was, but probably around Monza time, I suppose. But that's usually when it happened. But I can't remember exactly when they said Ayrton's going to be the teammate. I mean, I was always on a yearly contract anyway. So I didn't even know if I was going to be there. So I can't remember when I signed up for the following year, or when I got signed up by Frank. But no, I can't remember. No.
Do you remember how you felt though? Because you'd had a little run-in with Ayrton, hadn't you, in the 93 season?
Yes, 93. I got basically I got told off by him for the way I drove. Which
Tell us a story.
It was coming from him. I thought was a bit rich, but he sent his manager around to get me after a race, and Mr. Senna would like to see you. So okay, right. So round you go, and he said he sat there. We were the same age virtually. And he sat there and said, you're a young driver. I said, well, I'm about the same as you. And I'm young in terms of years of racing, I understand that. And he said, you should be, you should be very careful about how you do things. Sometimes it can go wrong. And I was thinking, I know your career, mate, honestly, really? You're telling me. And he was trying to put me in my place, I think. So, trying to get me to respect him, and
And what had you done then on the track?
I think I tried to block him.
You'd had the audacity to race him.
I had the audacity to actually race and stop him overtaking me. But of course, he'd done us all up a kipper at Donington, hadn't he? In that famous race that he went round the outside of me. Anyway, that's another story. Can't get that back. But he was a great of the sport.
Yeah.
But also another complicated individual. But
so as a rival,
I wasn't going to take any racing tips from him.
As a rival, he was a complicated individual trying to leave a mark on you, I guess, to see whether that would impact you on the track. What was he like as a teammate? If Alain Prost was very private, what was he like? I
didn't have long enough to be with him. I mean, there was moments that I had with Ayrton where we all watched Ayrton. Everyone in F1 was watching what he did because he was so mesmerizing, really. But as a person, he was a kind person. You could tell he was a kind person, really. He had a very big heart, and he was very determined to do the right thing and to do good for the world if he could. So he was an impressive personality, impressive character, and meant a lot to Brazil. Obviously, he was, at his funeral, I remember someone saying to me, he said he was the best thing about Brazil. They had enough troubles, but he gave an entire nation a reason to hope. And so they're very passionate people, the Brazilians. But I mean, he really was huge to them. And he understood that. He understood that he had a responsibility to a whole country. So he wasn't just racing for himself. And so you were aware of that when you're with him. He was discreet. I think he was fairly diplomatic and discreet about what he thought, and but very, very serious. Not in any way frivolous at all.
Really? Would he offer you advice and help and put his arm around you about racing, or not really?
No, but there's a poignant part of the film where he had a conversation with Georgie at Imola, and talking about me. He said Georgie was worried about, and he said, "Don't worry, Damon will be fine. He's a nice guy." Blah blah, and and Williams are a good team, and so forth. So he didn't have to say that. He was, but I didn't get enough time to be with him. I mean, if you want to know Ayrton better, you have to speak to Gerhard or someone who's been with him for a long time, or anyone at McLaren who knew him that well.
And he said those things about you just hours before his final race, right?
Yeah.
And how did you feel when Georgie told you that?
Well, I didn't know that until a long time afterwards. But, well, everything's sad about Imola. You know, what can you say? There's nothing that is not just heavy with grief and pain for that weekend, and irony and tragedy and the whole lot.
But what took my breath away was understanding that after it died, the race continued.
Well, it stopped while they dealt with Ayrton.
Sure.
And then they restarted the race, yeah.
But I'm interested in what was going on in your mind.
My mind was, I hope they find out what it was, you know, and if it's, you know, but I'll do what I'm asked to do. You know, I was asked to drive the car and I didn't back out of it. I didn't say, oh, wait a minute. You know, I had the option. I could have said, well, wait, what's going on here? Why did he go off and so forth? You don't do that as a racing driver. You're in race mode and you just default to race restarts in 10 minutes or whatever. And you go, okay, crack on, you know.
When did you know that the accident was more serious than just another accident?
I knew on the grid, but I didn't know that. Anne Bradshaw, who was the Williams PR woman, I asked, she said, Ayrton's gone off. And I said, well, how is he? And she said, well, it's not good. You know, it's quite serious. Well, that has a whole range of possible interpretations to it. So I didn't know he died until the end of the race. And then I was told. And I was in the medical centre because I had to drive without the power steering because they weren't sure what had gone wrong, so they turned off the power steering. So I'm like trying to turn this car that's designed to use it. So I'm dehydrated and everything, and I'm in the medical centre, and Dickie Stanford came and said, you know, that Ayrton had died, and that's the first I heard of it. So, yeah, I mean, you know, if you're talking about, we'd already lost Roland the day before. Don't forget, it's just like the whole weekend was a complete and utter horror story.
Yeah,
you know, and people not knowing what to do, how to respond, and just it was shocking.
And what about your own personal fear? Because if they're coming to you saying we're going to turn off the power steering, that naturally leads a driver to think, well, is there an issue with the car here? What's going on? Then they're asking you to go out on that. Race.
I write in my book, I've gone into that in great depth, and I have made it very clear, abundantly clear, that I went also through all the technical data that we had after that, after Ayrton's accident and so forth. And my opinion is that it's a combination of factors, and it was not a mechanical failure.
Yeah.
But I cannot convince anybody of that, because once they've got it in their mind, then they stick with it. So from my point of view, getting back to what you asked, and I trusted the team. What else can I do? I can't keep going to the team and going, oh, are you sure you've done that? Have you done that? Or have you tightened that bolt? You can't go racing like that. You trust the team completely. And you also accept that people are fallible. Sometimes things will go wrong. And you crash their car sometimes, you know, because you made a mistake. So you're in a team, and you go, you're doing your best, and I trust you're doing your best, and we'll go racing like that.
But I'm interested in that word. It's a small word, trust, that we've spoke about it in two different contexts here. We spoke about the lack of trust that you had in other people after your dad's accident, and now you've seen an accident that affects somebody else, and you're now having to apply trust to others. Would you tell us what trust means, and how did you develop that?
Well, I suppose in that context, your team is your family in that sense. You know, you work hard together, and you build up a relationship, and they know who you are, and you know what they're like, and so your bond is quite strong in those situations. Clearly, you know, you have moments where people are annoyed with each other, but it's like a family. You know, you come back together. So you have plenty of good reason to trust people because you know them better. And it's the people you don't know that it's difficult to trust.
The most remarkable thing is you then still had a world championship to fight for in 1994. What did you do to put that weekend to bed and mentally move forwards for the rest of 94 when you came so close to winning the world title?
I think I concluded that up until they died, both Roland and Ayrton loved racing. They loved doing it. And that's why they were there. And that if you didn't understand the risks before, then you were, you shouldn't really be doing it, you know? So there was no starker example of the risks happening. I mean, don't forget, Ayrton got in the car after Roland had his fatal accident. He decided, I am going to race. And so if we all walked away, then we would be not true to ourselves. You know, it's very difficult. I mean, I think Ayrton got in the car because that's who he was. He knew that was Ayrton Senna. And he was a racer, and he give him a racing car, he's going to go and try and win a race. Without that, we would never have heard of him. You know, he wouldn't have been Ayrton Senna. And this is part of being true to yourself, really, I think. You know, so the idea was, okay, we are going racing. So once you get over that, we're not going to stop. I mean, Gerhard also spoke about not knowing whether he was going to carry on, and everyone knew. What we did know was that things had to change because something was wrong, either with the cars, the design of the cars, the regulations. They'd come from active suspension and suddenly they'd gone back to passive suspension, and there was clearly things they hadn't understood. And Max Mosley was very hot on making changes rapidly, just to show that they could represent themselves as being responsible sporting body, the FIA. Yeah. And so he said, right, we are making this safe as possible. And him and Charlie Whiting and Tim Watkins went to work, and together with the teams, they made the car safer. And that's why we have the halo. Ultimately we have the HANS device, the halo, and Romain Grosjean can drive 150 miles an hour through a steel barrier, burst into flames and get out unscathed, you know. And that wouldn't have happened without what the changes that took place after Imola.
It's one of the tragedies of F1 is it takes the death of drivers to change safety. And in that season, you know, diffusers got smaller. They changed the front wings. They increased the protection for drivers' heads either side of the cockpit. But you still had to get back in the car. Did you and Georgie ever have a conversation about, do we carry on or not?
Yeah, clearly. You know, I mean, it was. We had 2 children. I had Oliver and Josh. So we had a family. And Georgie was never put any pressure on me to stop. It wasn't the first time it had happened, unfortunately. We'd lost Bertrand Farby as well at my first F3 year. I was at Goodwood, and he was killed in testing there. And so this was like a repeat conversation. It's not a question of, oh, well, the rewards are so great, then it's worth the risk. It's actually, what if you don't do that, then where does it stop? If you don't accept challenges, where do you stop? You know, you just don't go out your front door. You know, where does it stop? Because most people wander around. No, I don't want to offend most people, but I mean, let's be honest. We take it for granted. We're going to go out the front door and we're going to come home tomorrow, later on that day. We don't know. So every time you do anything, you're accepting that there's risk, there's chance, there's a hazard, and you know, we have to keep going on. We don't have any choice. We can't back away every time from every challenge.
But as being the father now of 2 young boys, you can also see the world from the perspective from their perspective, and having experienced such tragedy yourself. How did you reconcile?
Well, it was a difficult one. I mean, I had to justify it somehow to myself, and I suppose it was again coming back to, well, this is a defining of me, and I want to be fulfilled in my life, because I think that will be, hopefully that will be an example to them in whatever they do. I mean, as my dad was to me, you know, so my dad was someone who did not shy from life's challenges. He wanted, he overcame and he embraced them, and that made him someone who we could admire, the same as Ayrton and a lot of other people.
And you embraced the challenge. You went back into the car. You started picking up some great race wins, and quite a remarkable thing actually happened to you in Japan that year, didn't it?
Well, yeah. I mean, this is in the film. I mean, I wrote about it in my book as well, and it's to do with the kind of sense of an experience where I felt I wasn't driving the car. It was being driven by something that wasn't me. I mean, and I was under pressure to perform because Mike was catching me, and it was on aggregate time, so I couldn't see him at wheel to wheel, but I knew he was catching me, and so I had one last lap, and I had the rate he was catching me would have meant he would have passed me unless I pulled out some phenomenal lap, which I would say I got to the point where I thought to myself, okay, I'm done. I can't find out. I can't think how to go faster than this. And I sort of said to myself, well, like, Ayrton, if you're up there, sort of semi seriously, if you're up there, I could do with a hand. And something happened, which was extraordinary, which was I suddenly found myself like a passenger in a car being driven by a maniac. That's the only way I could describe it. And I literally felt detached from what I was doing. And it was like suddenly I'd been released from all the constraints of being worried about getting it wrong. I suppose when you're racing, you're always kind of slightly one next step. This was like, okay, we're taking away all the safety ropes, or the safety harnesses. We are literally metaphorical safety harnesses. You're now acting without a net, okay? High wire act without a net. And it was just like the car just went for half a lap without me driving it, is what it felt like. I mean, it can be explained. Neuroscientists will be able to say, okay, well, this is what happens in a situation where you're very stressful, is that your conscious brain retreats from the functions of the limbic system, and then you're acting more instinctively, and that's the only thing I could put it down to. But it definitely happened.
Yeah, but you've had numerous races where you've been under pressure. Have you ever had that similar?
No, but it was self-induced pressure as well. It was because I wanted that much. I wanted so badly to stop Michael,
and that left you with an opportunity to stop Michael.
Yeah.
And that led to, in Adelaide, I mean, at the end of 1994, remains one of the most famous moments in Formula One history.
Yeah, infamous.
Have you come to terms with it?
Well, every time I see it, I look at it and I go, oh, don't go for the gap. I can't.
I thought exactly, I watched it again knowing we were chatting, and I thought, wait till you go around the corner.
I didn't see his car.
His car's wrecked.
I didn't know that. So I'm behind him. I didn't see him hit the wall. All I see is coming back on the track. And I was thinking he's got grass on his tyres. That's why he's squirming around. I thought, I've got to get him now. Otherwise, he'll be back up to speed again. So that was why I went for the gap. But then what I didn't account for was that he would not see me. So
you make a great politician. There's then that moment where you're sitting in the pits. They're trying to mend the broken suspension rod, and you're shaking your head.
Yeah.
Did you think at that point, well, at least they're going to look at this and ascertain that he cheated to get the result, so I'll be okay anyway? Did you think at that point you might still be
he's trying to fix the Patrick's trying to bend the suspension back into place, and I can see it's not going to work. And my actual thoughts were, if you think I'm driving around Adelaide at 200 miles an hour with a thing you bent back into place, you got another thing coming. But I mean, the question is out. They could have, because there was quite a big gap between me and the rest of it. I could have got a point, which would have been enough. And they still asked the question: did they have time? Probably not to change the suspension. But yes, after the race, Barry Sheen said to me, who was down there for the race, who'd been buddying up with me the whole time, and he was a motorcycle racer, so I was really excited to be with Barry. And but he was saying, he just said to me, look, everyone saw what happened. Don't say nothing. All right. So I went, okay, good advice. And I was expecting that there would be outrage. I kind of partly thought, well, when people look at it, there'll be outrage, and then the stewards will have but there was a reluctance because of it, because of Imola, because of the, there was a reluctance to have a kind of fight over it at the end in that way. I think people like Williams, they just went, look, let's just move on. We put up a good fight. It didn't go our way. And I think in those days, you wouldn't get a steward's inquiry in the way we do now, where it would be reported and then they'd look at it. And
did you not want to fight at that point, though?
No, because I was done too. I literally thought, I've done everything I can. I can't, I don't want to be haggling over a win. It's like, the umpire says you're out, then you don't want to be standing there going, no, I'm not, I wasn't, it was, it's all wrong. you don't want to be doing that.
Did you ever go to Michael and say?
I did the next day. I didn't say, all I said, he was having breakfast and I went up to him. I said, well done, world champion. And he sort of looked at me rather sheepishly and said, thanks. But I never spoke to him about it after that. But I mean, we had our moments the following year, 95, you're talking about, it was a disaster. I basically got overexcited a few times and we had more contretemps. But I didn't really come out too well looking in 95.
You mentioned a few times, Damon, like from that Brands Hatch, the first time you spun off, to even that moment in Adelaide, where you were clear of how you wanted to be seen. You wanted to be seen as you.
Well, I wouldn't put it. It wasn't so much what I wanted to be seen as. I myself didn't want to be that sort of person,
And that's what I want to explore. So how did you want to be perceived? What were your values that you wanted to show the world?
I think it. I mean, my dad was, whenever we wanted to complain about something, he would stop us immediately. That it was, you don't want to be a whinger. You don't want to be someone who's, saying life's not fair. If we would say, "Oh, Dad, that's not fair," and life's not fair. No, just stop now. Okay, you're going to get the rub of the green, as they call it in golf. You're going to get good bounces, bad bounces. Sometimes people who make the wrong decision. And I do feel that this is sort of connected with obviously what happened in Abu Dhabi in 21 is a huge, in many people's eyes, an injustice. But of course, it is also a sport in which the decision makers, the rule makers, and the judges also make mistakes as well. And you've got to accept that is going to be part of the bag. You don't want it to be like that. And of course, if it's atrocious, if it's corrupt, then that's got to be stopped. But if it's just how do you undo something once it's been established that something's been wrong? How far do you go back? You got Felipe Massa's trying to get his victory back in. Well, if that happens, then what happens the next?
Yeah.
You can't go back in history and change it because it has a knock-on effect into the future, into the now, and you'll have just an avalanche of people putting in lawsuits. I mean, it's just. I mean, in some ways, sport is about accepting the ref's decision as well as, when we got VAR.
I think you are a real stoic, though. There's one clip that comes to my mind when I think about you being a stoic, and it's when Michael wasn't happy with a race result. You came walking up the stairs, I think at Silverstone. He banged the front of your cap. Remember that?
Yeah.
And you didn't react. You didn't turn back at him. No. You didn't rise up at him.
It was embarrassing, wasn't it? I mean, he was trying to buddy up with me. It's now that I'm the winner or whatever. I don't know. I mean, it was an interesting clip in that film.
I thought it was
those little moments really kind of, because I'd endured a lot of his comments, that were not so flattering about me. And I thought, okay, why would I? Anyway, the games people play when they're competing.
Yeah. What did you think of the games that Michael played?
I think he was what he was. He was a competitor. He was someone who was able to put pressure on every little part of your life. There's some good bits of film in the film about Michael. But of course, I will say this: if it wasn't for Michael, I would never have found out to what height I could go as a racing driver.
Explain that.
Well, I'd had, like I said, I had to extend myself beyond what I was capable of, and I won. And there's a picture of him congratulating me after Suzuka. He didn't do that very often, and I think he knew that I'd put up a good performance, and so that's also magnanimous of him. So the rivalry gave me an opportunity. He's a 7-time world champion. He'd never won a world championship until then. I was getting so much grief for being beaten by him. But eventually, I beat races. I won against him in races, fair and square. And eventually, I won a world title. Admittedly, he was in an uncompetitive car at the time. But I fought against some of the greatest names. I can measure up against Alan Prost, or Ayrton didn't give me a chance, unfortunately. I was not as quick as him, but I'd love to have known how much closer I could have got, and raced against Michael and Nigel, and I didn't do too bad,
I think you did very well indeed. I mean, the hardest period would have been 95.
Yeah.
Was it the fact that devastation at the end of 94, of feeling that you were kind of robbed of a world title lingering on, or was there other stuff going on in 95?
No, I think 95 was a real crisis year for me. Where I had to resolve. I had to work out what was going on. I was very confused by what was happening, and then as I was talking about before, I got some good advice, and that helped me sort my head out. But that wasn't until the end of the year, and so that sorting my head out and understanding things better and being less naive meant that I was better prepared for 96, which I fairly sailed through, frankly.
Yeah.
It wasn't that stressful.
Had Michael's mind games in 95 kind of won, if you know what I mean?
Yeah, completely. Yeah, I fell for it. I got suckered in. Do you remember when Checo came out and said he was going to fight Michael for the world championship and stuff? You don't announce this. I think I went into 95 thinking, right, this is going to be fun. I'm going to be, fighting Michael. And I didn't understand the sophistication that you needed to have to fight for a world title from the beginning. I was never expecting to fight for the world title in 94, but 95 I kind of was expecting to be in a contender. And so I think I just overreached myself a few times.
And for those that aren't aware of their F1 history, we're going back 30 years now. Would you share with people some of the things that Michael did that did have that effect on you?
Well, he'd do stuff like in the press conference, I'd won a race or I'd be in pole position, or I can't remember what it was. And they come to me, and when they're doing that, he'd start up a conversation with Jack or someone like that. So he's chatting away while you're talking. So you'd kind of go, I wasn't talking when you were being interviewed. So anyway, little things like that would start to irritate you, and stuff. So he was quite adept at dismissing you to the press, and I like a fool rose to the bait, So,
and were you talking to each other in 95 or not really?
I mean, it's odd because in driver briefings, he and I would have conversations or discuss things and sort of work together on stuff as well. But he was very aloof, he's able to cut himself off. So you couldn't get any connection at all, human connection with him, which I think that's my particular weakness, is if someone's not showing me some sort of humanity, I kind of get irritated by that a bit.
Yeah.
And you said you sorted your head out at the end of that season. Would you describe a bit more detail of what that means?
Well, I'd been beaten. I felt beaten, and I wanted to understand why I was beaten and why I was beaten mentally. And so what is it I'm not doing or not understanding? So I got some woman who was actually, you might remember this, Jake, I don't know, there was a bit on the, it was BBC then, wasn't it? But anyway, it was someone who had been drawn in to talk about the difference between Damon and Michael. And she was talking about body language and stuff like that. And I thought, I've got to speak to this woman. How do I do the body language thing? Okay. And so I got her out to Ireland to have a chat with me. And I was going, it's been awful because I got this problem, that problem. And she just went, save it for the book. In other words, nobody's interested in your bleating and your problems. And this is a task. And we now need to identify what you need to do to achieve the task and cut out all the extraneous distractions, the things that are going to make that more difficult.
And that helped?
Oh, yeah. It was incredible.
And then 96 rolls around, the greatest season of your life. And again, there's more craziness going on because while you're fighting for a world title, you don't come to agreement with Williams for 97 onwards when they bring...
No, so every year in my racing career until I got to Eddie Jordan, I only ever had a 1-year contract.
Right.
So every year was like, I've got to renegotiate. Have I got a job for next year? And it turns out that my opportunity, because they'd signed Jack Villeneuve, so that's one seat gone. And it turns out they'd signed up another driver, Heinz Harald Frentzen, without letting me know, and were trying to get... When I started winning and winning the World Championship, they were trying to find a way, they say, of dispensing with one of the drivers so I could stay on, but they couldn't get rid of them. They wouldn't move. That's partly the story. But anyway, the story came out that I'd lost my drive by Hockenheim. So Hockenheim was in, August, something like that, or it was middle of the season. It wasn't that late in the season. July, maybe. So quite early to find out that even if I win the championship, I'm not going to keep my job. And then I didn't believe it. And then it turns out it was true. And so I had to, it was announced that I'm still fighting for the World Championship. And then it was announced at Monza that I wouldn't be staying with the team. Frank called me.
What did he say?
He said, Damon, I'm sorry to say we can't keep you on for next year. Got to do what's right for the team. Hope you understand, that sort of thing.
And
what did you say?
I said, I understand completely, Frank. What can he do?
And what did he say to
maybe
your
what
wife?
I would have done now is, oh no, you don't. I might have said that.
But again, there's the stoic.
Yeah.
Amor Fati accepting your fate.
I might as well have said, hit me in the face. Why don't you hit me with a cricket bat? I mean, I should have probably put.
You must have felt furious, though.
Hey, that's like we're saying about what you have control over and what you don't have control over. There's stuff if that's what can I do to fix that? I don't understand what had my mind immediately switched on to, right, I am leaving this team with a world championship. I'm taking it with me. You might not keep me for next year, but you're not going to keep the world champion either. So,
and what was the difference then between? So once you made that kind of commitment, what difference did you notice in terms of your performance?
I think it was business as usual. Just get back to the job that you need to do. Unfortunately for me, I crashed out of Monza by hitting the tyres and put more pressure on myself. So I took it down to the wire. But the good thing is the viewing figures went up. And so I phoned Bernie. I said, you owe me. I've taken this down to the wire. They got it. They were thinking it was going to be done in Portugal, and they got Mick Jagger down there and Jerry, and there was a big kind of press junket, and they were literally around the front of my car, and I had to kind of keep them off stepping on my front wing. I'm on the front row at Estoril, and there's Mick and Jerry having the picture taken, and Bernie's had them down, and they really thought that was where it's going to be decided, but it didn't happen for whatever reason. I had a thrust bearing failure or something like that, thrust washer clutch thing, gearbox. And so it went on for 3 weeks. There was a 3-week gap, in which time I had to find a drive for the following year and then win the race or beat Jack in Japan. But it went down to the wire, thrilling until about lap 15 or 16 when his wheel fell off. And
what a story, though. And I, as we sit here and talk about it, I think like the brilliant thing about you was that you were very different to everyone else in that world, and you were true to yourself. So you had the mind games of Michael Schumacher going on. You had the sort of the coldness, if you like, of Frank Williams. The inability to connect on a human level to your biggest rival, Michael, as well. Yet you were a real human being among all of this, and I think that's a real testament to you.
Possibly, Jake, because I spent a long time getting this, so I'd had a lot of growing up out of that world, on my own, where I could be myself and stuff. So I sort of knew who I was a little bit, and I wasn't. What is it like? I'm interested to know how these drivers today have a life. I mean, they have always been a Formula One driver. They even, from the age of 10 or whatever, they're signed up.
Yeah.
So they've always been in that world. And it's kind of like, you need to get some perspective on this, because this is a reality, but only in this bubble. Sorry, I touched your mic. But yeah, it is, I think I was lucky in that way, in some ways, that I kind of had this one foot on, on terra firma. And I wanted it on terra firma as well.
So that journey of discovery you went on with the therapist once you finished racing, what did you learn on that journey that you would pass on or advice you'd dispense
I would say
to some of these young riders?
I'd say do it as soon as you can. I think we need to know ourselves better. We're in such perilous times now. I think that we need to be motivated more than by more developed faculties than simply a desire for proving a point. The unproven statistic of the most successful, the most of the top people in business are psychopaths. Have you heard that one? That I'm not sure whether that's been proven correct yet, but I mean, we don't want psychopaths running our world. People who haven't got any empathy. Elon Musk famously has announced that empathy is the biggest problem.
Yeah.
Well, that's a worry for me.
See, the strange thing is, in your world that you lived in, I obviously spent a few years in Formula One and found that the least empathetic drivers were often the fastest.
Well, listen, if you're doing something, let's say you're a fighter pilot and you've got to go, you have to go and shoot someone out the sky. You can't go, I don't want to do it, because sometimes there's an imperative. There's something which is, and we make an imperative out of, motor racing and so forth. So you do need to be ruthless to compete. I mean, but you don't need to be a total bastard.
Yeah.
You don't need to be vindictive. You don't need to be take delight in other people's suffering as well. That would not be something that I would admire in a sports person.
But in your career, you said when Ayrton Senna pulled you in and tried to give you some racing tips, you were like, hold on, I've seen the way you race. I'm not sure I should listen.
I didn't think,
You had Michael Schumacher who tried to sort of break you psychologically throughout your career. You've spoken about Max Verstappen these days as being a bit like Dick Dastardly. Like, there is a recurring theme sometimes with the best of the best of the best that they have.
Yeah.
They have this thing.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a question of winning at all costs. What is the cost of winning? And, Jackie wrote his title of his book, Jackie Stewart's book, was Winning is Not Enough. In other words, it's not all about winning. It is, to a degree, how you go about it. I think that's what we're after with sport. Sport is a theatre, and it's a theatre where there's no script, there's a kind of general rule, but the principles are you want to see things that you admire, and that includes behaviour.
Yeah.
Not just victory.
Time for some quick-fire questions to wrap things up.
Yep. What are the 3 non-negotiable behaviours that you and the people around you have to buy into?
No bullshit. Let's not bullshit. I mean, let's not. Directness and saying what you really mean is better than trying not to say the thing that you need to say. Personal hygiene.
Very important. I'm not sure anyone's ever said that before, which is worrying.
Non-negotiable. Sense of humour. There you go.
Yeah, very good.
Yeah. So how about being able to laugh at oneself in an appropriate way, not being the butt end of jokes. I don't mean that.
Sure.
I mean being able to spot your own foibles and fluffs.
Are you happy?
Yeah, I'm content. I mean, I'm mostly happy, but I'm content. Sometimes I'm absolutely furious and angry, and that's usually because I can't play golf and stuff like that, or find things.
If you could give one piece of advice to a 15-year-old Damon, what would it be?
I would say there is infinite possibilities, and you have infinite possibilities. You have infinite potential. Don't believe anything's impossible. Don't be told you have to do this or you have to do that. Find out for yourself.
If you could go back to one moment in your life, where would you go and why?
Adelaide, 94.
Would you?
No, that's not true. Where would I go back to? I'm happy where I am. I don't want to go back. I've been there. I've done that. Back it's happened. It's gone. What I want to do next after this interview is more interesting.
If you did go back to Adelaide 94, what would you do?
If I would, clearly I would have had X-ray specs, and I would have seen through the wall and seen.
But you now know what you know.
Suspension.
So you would just sit behind him for that right-hander, right?
I would literally. It's a good question. If I had known what to do, like I know now, I would have just followed him until he had to park, and I would have gone.
And the final question, Damon, what's your one golden rule to living a high-performance life?
Golden rule for thinking a high-performance life is time is, you can't get time back. You have to ask yourself, what can I do now? What can I be doing now to make things better for tomorrow? Because you don't know if there's a tomorrow. So I hate saying things like that because I don't know what's going to happen. But I mean, it is time is the thing. And when you're young, it just pours through your fingers. And it's fine to take time out, but I think as you get older, you don't want to waste it. You can't buy time.
Good man. Thank you so much for your time. You've given us plenty of it.
Thank you very much indeed, Jake. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.